Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks to all of you who are here early and on time. Good to see a couple of new faces. Hi, Kelly, that we missed in our last session. It's great to have you fully with the group. Um,
Yeah, hi. Sorry about that. I had another engagement and sorry I didn't communicate.
No, we know it's hard. This group actually spans 4 different continents, and so it is just I haven't even tried to count how many time zones we're in. So I'm well aware that there's always going to be somebody who's really struggling to make the timing work for them. So I'm just really glad that everyone's here. And in the kind of 1 minute before we get started, I am going to remind folks that we got the WhatsApp group set up. And as far as I am aware, everybody who wants to be in that WhatsApp group is in it and has been, has received the invitation. If you want to be in it and you aren't there yet, drop me an email and we'll make sure that we can get that all sorted out for you. And that WhatsApp group was just something that you guys requested as a place to, kind of continue the conversations. We have about a month between each session that we're doing. So I thought you guys had a great idea as a way to kind of keep the conversation flowing or bring up questions that occur to you between sessions, that kind of thing. So if you're not already in it and you want to be, send me an email and we'll get it all with obviously with your WhatsApp contacts, and we will get it sorted out. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick off and say welcome again to everyone. Really excited. This is our first official session of Powering Up Local Consultants. We are following the sort of curricula or the plan of topics that you guys said were important. You remember in our kind of pre-co-creation session, we talked about what we, the planners, had learned was important for local consultants. We talked to local consultants themselves about what they struggled with. We brought that all to our co-creation session. And after discussing it a little bit, you voted you voted on um, what were the most important sessions for you to cover over the 6 months that we're going to be doing this. We're going to go roughly till June, and we're going to have roughly 6 to 8 sessions overall. We thought we'd kick that all off with talking to hiring managers. So today, because we want to understand, like, what should we be doing to get those opportunities to get on the radar? And today we have 3 different kinds of hiring managers that we're talking to. So we have Sarah Kozin from Apt Associates, who is representing kind of those big consulting firms that do a lot of USAID work. They have a lot of USAID programs that they are bidding for and managing, and systems behind how they do their consulting. After we talk to Sarah Kozin, we're going to talk to, just to make it confusing, Sarah Murray, who is our second speaker today. And she is giving us a little bit of a different perspective, kind of the World Bank. If you guys know who CGAP is, they really work on the microfinance piece at the World Bank. So Sarah Murray is going to give us that perspective of, if you're interested in working for the World Bank, where do we find those opportunities? How does it kind of work? And then our third speaker is going to bring us the NGO perspective. So we have Katie Whitehouse, who is with Danish Refugee Council. Although she is not officially representing Danish Refugee Council, she's just using her work with them and other NGOs to give us that NGO perspective on, again, where are there opportunities? Where do you find them? What are hiring managers looking for? How do you set yourself up so that you can get those opportunities? And the way it's going to work, we're going to keep it pretty informal because we want you to be asking the questions that are important to you. And they're here and ready to share. So we want to make sure that you are putting questions in the Q&A. Each speaker is going to have about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more, to present an idea that they think is something important for you guys to talk about or think about or know. And we'll have a little bit of discussion between the consultants and myself, just kind of facilitating a conversation that we hope prompts questions from all of you. So don't be shy, put those questions in the Q&A, and then as we move along, we will start to really pull those questions out and help you hear the answers to the questions that you have from those different perspectives. So with that, Sarah, I said you were going to kick us off. So tell us, what are the big consulting firms looking for when you're looking for a local consultant? Where do you look? What are you looking for? How can they find those kinds of USAID opportunities? Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Carrie. Great question, and happy to be speaking with everyone today. So at Abt Associates, I'm our Director of Agriculture Market Systems, and I straddle our work on new program design, identifying and bidding on new opportunities, new projects and grants, as well as providing technical advisory support to ongoing programs. And we look for consultants to support both of those activities. So consultants at the design phase often help us when we are determining whether or not to pursue a new opportunity. And we often engage local consultants as we're preparing to bid on or submit proposals for upcoming requests for proposal that USAID is putting out. And then on the project side, we often look for local consultants to support a range of needs on ongoing programs. And so the best kind of point of contact on that latter side is the in-country project team. That's usually going to be the team looking for local consultants. I end up focusing a lot on identifying local consultants when we're looking at new opportunities. And one of the main pathways or tools that I use for that ends up being LinkedIn. And I know that's come up in some of your discussions as this group before, but just want to reiterate that I find that a really helpful tool to expand my network and identifying potential collaborators as local consultants. Some of the main things that might go overlooked in kind of setting up a LinkedIn profile that I think are important to kind of re-emphasize are having that open to work kind of banner on your profile picture that immediately shows people who might be just searching, local consultant, agriculture, and then a country. It shows when your picture comes up that you're open to work. A second thing is in the kind of byline or description that comes under your name, noting that you're a consultant or an expert or an advisor or a specialist. All of those words kind of indicate to a hiring manager that A, you're an expert in a certain field or you have a particular technical expertise, and B, that you might not have full-time employment and therefore might be open to consulting engagements. So those words like, in addition to consultant, just expert and advisor kind of indicate that you might be interested in short-term consultancies. And the third thing is within your LinkedIn profile, having either an email address or a copy of your CV that includes an email address is very helpful as a way for potential hiring managers to get in touch with you. Not everyone pays for the version of LinkedIn that allows you to send messages to people you're not connected with. And not everyone checks LinkedIn every day. So having your email address or your CV is kind of a clear pathway to be easily reachable. Maybe I'll pause there and let others chime in, but thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So those are some super practical tips just for making sure that your LinkedIn profile is really doing some of the work for you and saying, hey, I'm available. And I know that not everybody on our call has a LinkedIn profile yet. Some, I'd say about 50% do. Some do, some don't. So just a quick question. Are there other ways that you reach out to people? Not through LinkedIn? Is there something else? If there's some really good reason why LinkedIn is hard, something else to recommend?
Yeah, I think broader networking is also really key. So when I am trying to identify a local consultant in a place that I don't live, I usually reach out to my professional network. So anyone I know in that country, or if I have a project team in that country, I would reach out to them as well, and share kind of the scope or the terms of reference of the consultancy that I'm considering and ask that they circulate that within their networks. So being connected to others in country in the same organization
Right.
can be a path as well.
So that network is super, super important. Last question, and then I'm going to pivot on to Sarah Murray. A lot of folks I hear this a lot from local consultants, not just in this group, beyond, that there's a sort of perception that the only way for a local consultant to work on a USAID program, because there's lots of USAID programs, right? But the only way to do that is for themselves to apply directly to USAID. Can you give us a sense of how often you take on local consultants or even local consulting companies as a path, from their perspective, it's a pathway to doing USAID work and getting familiar with it. I want people to understand how much opportunity is actually there.
Absolutely. So the way that USAID programs are implemented is USAID either gives a large grant to an organization or they contract with an organization like the one that I work for. And so those who are implementing the program do not work for USAID. So if you want to work for, the USAID funded Feed the Future program in a given country, the way to do that is to work for the company that is implementing the program, not for USAID itself. And so understanding what that organization is, or the kind of sub-awardees or subcontractors that they have on that program, those are the paths to work on the program. So having in your network folks within those organizations is a great pathway to do so.
Great. There's actually very few local consultants who work directly for USAID. I think most of us who work with USAID, I always say with USAID, are actually working for APT or working for some other an NGO, like Katie's going to talk to us about, some other organization who is then has the contract with USAID. Great. Thanks, Sarah. Great perspectives. Sarah Murray, we're going to pivot a little, talk about another great big organization, which is the World Bank, that also has quite a lot of consulting opportunities for people. Over to you. Tell me.
Thank you, Carrie. Yes. Hi, everybody. Great to be here. So I work with CGAP, which is a think and do tank that is contained within the World Bank. And as you may or may not be familiar with, the World Bank is a kind of an institution and world unto its own, with operations, both lending and grants across the world, and also kind of sub-departments that support it, such as CGAP. CGAP is actually a membership organization that's supported by a number of funders in addition to the World Bank, but is housed within the bank. And I think, what I'll talk about today is global in nature and not necessarily limited to the reality of being a consultant for the World Bank, but has applicability there. I'm fairly new and working as what they call a a short-term consultant, but kind of which means that you are not full-time as an employee, but are kind of a semi-permanent member of a team for them. But yeah, I mean, I think what I wanted to talk about was this idea of knowing your offer as a consultant. And in my role within this team that I'm working with currently, I'm kind of a hiring manager for consultants across 10 different countries. The project I'm working on is taking this really kind of complex, ambiguous topic of how to advance financial inclusion in fragile markets, and trying to come up with some global recommendations, but focused in 10 specific fragile countries. And so we are very much reliant on 10 consultants in these countries that are our eyes and ears on the ground and that are translating and helping us understand what the context-specific barriers are and helping us kind of bring that together into a cohesive set of learnings and recommendations for global funders and implementers around the world. But what I've found in working with these kind of diverse group of consultants in 10 countries is that knowing your offer and your strengths and what you can bring to a process like that and being able to communicate that is super important. And I know you guys have already done some work in the last session on consultant identity, and you looked at your roles as a facilitator versus being a kind of an expert, but I wanted to expand that idea in a slightly different direction for you. And yeah, like help you think through being able to identify what the skills are that the hiring manager you're working with or that you want to work for might actually need, but aren't always in the position of being able to well articulate. And I will share kind of my failings as a hiring manager on this project at the beginning of it, because I think it's important from your position to be able to spot when hiring managers are not totally clear on what they need or what they want and help in partnership and develop what they need from you and how to get there. And so hopefully this lesson and my failures can work to your advantage there. And I think that can actually be kind of a superpower if you can get through that process quickly and match what's needed, identify it, and match that with what you're able to do. So the two skills that we really rely on in this work are local market knowledge, insights, and relationships. So helping us to understand who the players are, what they've done recently on sort of the financial service provider side or the regulatory side, and sort of making those connections, helping us understand who we need to talk to, why, what the trends are locally. And then the other skill set is really analysis. So bringing all of those insights into a cohesive story. The thing we can absolutely not do is make those connections, right? As a hiring manager, we are not locally in market. That is kind of what we need as a baseline service and partnership with our local consultants.
And so that's really what local consultants have that people need, and nobody else can provide it. It's that local knowledge and local networks that are the most valuable thing. So you were mentioning knowing your offer. And that, if I'm understanding you correctly, that's what you mean, is knowing how to describe the network that you have and the skills that you bring as it relates to each opportunity, each need that a firm might have. Am I getting that right, Sarah?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that is a skill that's most valued in our kind of particular work here. But there's a second set that can kind of take that skill set to another level, which is the analysis and being able to not only make those connections and kind of set up interviews, but then draw all of that knowledge into a set of cohesive insights and that help tell the story of that answers the question that your hiring manager is trying to solve. And I think those are two different skills, two very different skills. And I don't think that consultants need to have both of them. And I'll tell you about some of my kind of learnings. It took me a while to understand what this project was about and what CGAP actually was trying to achieve. So the beginning was a bit messy, and we're working with all these different consultants that have different skill sets. And, I went through a process of defining what the goals were for myself, for my own project, And then 2, defining and understanding what the skills were with my counterparts at the country level. And so today, now a year and a half into this project, I have a very different way of working with a consultant in country X who has excellent relationship, is very fast and responsive, and able to kind of connect and help us know who we need to talk to, but is not going to do the analysis or create visuals and slides and write up that's what I am going to do. And it took us a while to figure that out. And I think if we had started over, I would have asked some questions. Do you like doing, do you like putting together slides, or do you prefer to just set up those types of relationships and help us figure out who to talk to? Because it could have saved some time and kind of, tension, I think, there. On the other hand, we have other consultants that are really excellent at doing both and that have a bit more autonomy and kind of do the whole thing, bring the story to us. We go back and forth, they do some revisions, and then it's done and dusted. So there's different ways to work and to bring your skills to the table. But I think that dance of knowing what the hiring off, group needs, identifying when they don't know what they need and helping them get there potentially, and then being clear about where you're at on that kind of access, knowledge, and analysis matrix is really helpful. And
Well,
those are
here's
skills that can be
something-
developed. Yeah.
I'm anticipating that people have this question. And guys, feel free to start putting questions in the Q&A. You'll find that down on the bottom. I think there's it might be under more. If you have the 3 dots, there's a little thing that says Q&A, and you can put your questions in there. But my question to you, Sarah, is it might feel hard. I know as a consultant, for me, sometimes it feels really hard to say, I can't do that. I can do this. Do you have any tips for how to say that without like losing the job effectively?
Yeah. I think walking through how you've approached similar projects and kind of putting that forward as here's how I've approached this problem with client X in the past. Is that what you want? Is that how you want to work together? And really focusing on that. Here's what we might, being putting forth being propositional about how you think you could work together and clear about that is one way to do it without saying, I can't do that, but saying, I would like to do this. Are you open to working in this way and having more reviews or having me feed you potentially raw information, and having more of a dialogue-based relationship than a, deliverable-based relationship. I think,
Right.
yeah,
More touch points along the way then.
I think so. Yeah.
I know I can think of an example where I have been asked to do something that I've never done before, but I've just tried to be like really honest and say, okay, I haven't exactly done this, but it seems like you'd want to da da da. And then I lay out the proposition so that I've been honest at the front that I hadn't done it before, but you kind of tell them up front what your plan is. And then, as you said, say, is that what you want? And maybe it makes more of a dialogue. I think that brings you back to the earlier point that you were making of building kind of building in the expectations. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this goes back to the broader theme here of trust, right? And delivering on what you're capable of delivering on, not overpromising, and being honest with yourself about, okay, I'm good at this, I'm not good at that. Ultimately, that will build your credibility over for the long term, and that will make a relationship flow better from the start. But I understand that can be a tricky thing to achieve.
But it goes directly back to what other Sarah was saying in terms of if you do have that credibility, if you've built that honesty and credibility from the beginning, then when the call comes from like, hey, extend this out to your networks, in fact, people go, oh, this person was easy to work with, or this person, was really creative, or, however it plays out.
Yeah.
Because I think that trust piece is, we talked about that very briefly last time. And I think, and that's something we're going to talk about later on in this session, after we've done our Q&A. I think it's really important to think about the different ways that we build trust on both sides. It's the management of expectations, isn't it?
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? I'm gonna move on to Katie, so we try to stick to time, but any last points that you wanted to make sure that we you made before we move on?
I would just say don't undervalue the relationships, and think about, maybe it's a good exercise to think about how you package that or how you present that as a value add in a way that's coherent and connected to the hiring manager's goals, and sort of making those things connect and making that work. Yeah, I think that's that, plus just knowing where your skills lie. That's a superpower package there. Thanks, Carrie.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think that's such an important point, working to kind of match what they need, with what you do have to offer. Because, you know, we've all done it where you work on a team anyway. They can pull in different skills if they know there's something you don't have. So I think that's a really important point. Katie, we're looking to you to bring us kind of the NGO perspective on how NGOs find local consultants. Maybe are there different ways of working, different challenges? So over to you. What's the best way to kind of get on the radar?
Thanks, guys. So quick introduction. As Carrie said, I'm not necessarily representing the views of the Danish Refugee Council, but I do work as their global inclusive markets advisor. So I have a good perspective on international NGOs, procurement and hiring processes that I can provide a perspective on, but also I was a freelance consultant before this, so I can provide the other side of things. And it's actually a very useful position to be in, working in an INGO, because I can see what practices that they do internally that make it harder for freelance consultants, having been on the other side as well. And I'm always trying to improve that. I've got a few different points that I want to make, and I'm sure Carrie will jump in if I'm going over my 8-minute allocated slot. So we'll feel free, Carrie, to stop me if needed. I think I'm just going to quickly build on that Sarah's last point, first of all, on building a trusting partnership. So what you'll often find is when a tender comes out, a TOR from an international NGO, they often feel quite intimidating and like a shopping list. You know, you need to be able to do everything. And as they were saying, you might not be able to do everything, but it isn't a problem to say that I can do 80% of this and 20% I'm not quite sure on, or I need to talk to you about. What you have to remember is our organizations are huge. If there are gaps in what you cannot do, there might be actually internally how we can help support that or fill that as well, if we know there could be a problem. What we're trying to do is find the best solution to a gap that we have in terms of addressing a problem or a solution in a program. We don't necessarily want to outsource work. We don't hire consultants to outsource work. We're hiring for expertise and learning, and to build a partnership with you, to work with you to deliver or create work that is useful for both parties. And if we know that there are gaps, then we can adapt TORs to address that. Or indeed even look at partners we know ourselves, other consultants that could come in and support, because we have that knowledge as well. But if we don't know that from the start, then we get into a tricky issue. And what I've seen a lot of happening within our procurement is that we hire consultants that tell us that they can do everything and they oversell themselves. And later down the line, it creates massive problems in terms of the quality of the outputs that we're getting. And if you can reflect on the fact that actually sometimes a lot of our procurement processes take 4 months to do, and that does not include all the setup time that you do not see, which normally takes a minimum of 2 months to do, as well as budgeting, that if things start to fall apart with a consultancy, it has major implications on us internally, not only from delays on doing our program work, but also how we actually respond to the donor about those delays. So if we know everything up front, we can more honestly program and adapt our requests for consultancy support. If we hear it later, when we haven't got a chance to change the trajectory of this, that is when you harm the trust and the partnership, because it has much bigger implications. So as Sarah and Carrie were implying, you start to build trust if you're honest from the outset, so that you don't actually harm that relationship later on. Because if you cannot deliver later on, then there are bigger implications. You can get blacklisted from procurements in the future. And that has happened to certain consultants. We don't want to do that at all. We want to get access to more local consultants. So that's one thing about starting to really build that trusting partnership. And then I wanted to move on to more so the operationalization stuff about procurement. In big INGOs, it's not just a technical manager who understands market systems and all the language that you're used to that is actually a part of this process. There's a big procurement or supply chain team behind that as well. You'll probably know that because when you see tenders advertised, there is a lot of documentation to actually respond to, and that can be also intimidating in itself. One of the things I would say is there's normally quite similar requests for information from all INGOs. So have it on file somewhere so you're already ready in advance of tenders, because normally tenders are only marketed for say 2 to 3 weeks and you have a very short time frame in which to respond. So have it on file already so you're prepared and you're forward planning. I would also say—
Give an example of what you mean. So you mean like an updated CV that's ready to go, maybe just needs like your last, oh, the last thing I worked on was this. Let me just add that really quickly. Do you mean like cost proposals? Like this is going to take me 20 days to do, and I would, you know, first I'd read the literature, then I would do this. Do you mean that, or do you mean something different when you
There
say
are
have
multiple
already?
different things. So you might be requested to share examples of previous work, so have on file,
Right.
things like that. That are short examples of previous work that you've curated that you have. Yes, have CVs, but what I do is have different types of CVs for different types of clients that I'm going to work with, because I kind of know where they will be working. Some might be in wash markets, some might be in livelihood markets. So I tailor my CV with the experiences and references that I know will best support me in that. But then there's more of the administrative side. There'll be things around provide references and examples to previous work in the past, including how much other procurements have cost, because you need to show that you are a viable business, that you have been working for certain other NGOs. That sort of information, you have to go through all your business accounts to find. That takes time. And if you're already working on another piece of work, you might not have time to do that, and you might miss the opportunity to do to apply to a tender. There are a number of bits of documentation like that. Always keep all the tender information that you've actually used to apply for previous tenders on file so that you can just quickly update it. Particularly, and Danish Refugee Council is renowned for it. We have a very, very, very burdensome procurement process, which I'm trying to rectify. There are a lot of forms to fill in. I have worked as a freelancer, as a consultant for DRC before, and I had all of those on file before, so that I could quickly update them to be able to apply to tenders really quickly. And a number of INGOs are like that. So make sure that you have those packages to one side, because it will help you. I would also say that to show that value add, particularly from a local consultant perspective, when you're applying, show a value add in terms of the context that you already know. Show that you understand a market system within the local area and that you already have established context and relationships that you can put into proposal, and have that on hand. Not that you're having to constantly think about it when you're having to reply, that you know you've got a short paragraph already written that you can adapt to put into new tenders. Don't be intimidated by the TORs. They can be long, they can be confusing, they can have a lot of jargon in them. If you are confused, ask. Yes, those asks will go to the procurement department, but normally they forward them straight on to technical advisors that will be very happy to reply and clarify anything, or have discussions about deliverables that might be asked about, or for timeframes to, for instance, maybe you're not available to start immediately. Maybe you need a month because you're coming off another program. They are willing and flexible to hear those needs, but they need to know those needs. So you either put it into the proposal or you put in a clarification question, and they will respond and see if that's possible.
And a clarification question in that case would be something like, is the final deliverable time flexible? I can't start on this date, but I can start 2 weeks later. So could the end deliverable timeline, is it flexible?
Yes. We'll always put the optimum timeframes that we need, right, into a TOR, because that would be the perfect world. But none of us live in a perfect world. And we all work on programs that are constantly adapting to the complex environments that we work in. So we can be adaptable too. But again, we always need to know that knowledge up front to see if we can make that work with the projects that we're trying to deliver. So hence, going back to that first point, it's just about that communication and that open communication. And sometimes having confidence to do that, if you don't know the people that you could potentially be working with, can be a little bit challenging. Yeah. But it shows to me, if I get those questions, that a consultant is already thinking about the implications of the project management, and that builds confidence even in you asking the question, if you put that into the proposal.
I agree.
I have loads of other points, Carrie.
I feel like asking questions actually builds confidence in a way.
Yes.
It makes people feel that you are really engaging with it.
Yes. It's also useful to keep an eye.
Can I get you to wrap up?
I have a couple of last points, but we can come back. I'll have a last point, and I'll say there's a couple of other things that people could come back to if they want to discuss within this 2-hour window. So the last point as well is to keep your eye open for framework agreements. A framework agreement means that a NGO will put out a tender to potentially keep you on their books for 3 to 4 years, that they will give you as a preferred supplier, somebody they've already vetted and gone through all that annoying paperwork to come to if they need support on certain programs. Those come out occasionally, and that word framework agreement can sound intimidating. That is all it is that you actually say, these are the skills I have, this is where I work, this is the knowledge and relationships I can provide. Those are vetted, and then if we get more work that is coming through, you are on a framework agreement, which means that you won't need to reapply going through all of that paperwork. You've already done the first step, and we've decided you could be a preferred supplier, and we could actually work with you quickly. It puts you on our radar. It means that you get adverts for all tenders coming out and reduces the amount of work. The other points that I won't go into because I'm being stopped, and I knew that would happen, is setting up consultancy teams to support you if you've got your knowledge gaps. We can come to that. Payments and advance payments and how you actually negotiate payments and the challenges around that. Those are 2 other points, and also a few additional places that you can look to find work that is being advertised. So we can come back to that if anybody has other questions.
And I want to encourage all of the speakers to go ahead and respond to the Q&A questions that are in there. Go ahead and answer or indicate that you want to answer live. I'm going to start diving into those, but don't wait for me. is my point. So we have a question. Rachel, do you want to speak your question directly? Because I see that Rachel has asked about a tool to kind of succinctly outline your skills and experience, kind of like a CV, but not really a CV. I was wondering, Rachel, could you tell us more what you mean? Like, when would you use this not CV? What are we talking about here? Can we get Rachel to come on? You. Great. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Carrie. And thanks for the sharing from the ladies. What I meant was just picking up the point from Sarah. I think that's Sarah that just spoke previously. And she was saying that you need to outline, for example, your experience and skills, and they sort of like match them up with what the hiring manager is looking for. and sort of like do, for example, a sort of like skill set match. I'm just wondering whether there are tools or things out there, or I don't know what they would call them, which is not necessarily a CV, but something that that shows how you're matching up. For example, like a scorecard, how you'd match up with what hiring managers are looking for directly. This is what my question was. Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks, Rachel. Go ahead, Sarah Murray. I think she was speaking to you.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. You know, I don't know. It's a really good question. I will say that in my world, currently, like all of the hiring that we did was through word of mouth. So essentially what you're talking about, those skills came through references, and we were asking, okay, what has consultant in X country done? How'd they do at this thing? Tell me more about their relationships in X sector. What have they done in terms of facilitating visits or meetings or delegations? So I think you're getting at important things, that information gets to us and is what hiring managers are looking for. I haven't seen anyone do that in a really creative way that's not a CV. But I think two things. One, that points to kind of the importance of reputation and, you know,
Yeah.
following through on commitments and building your brand through meeting expectations and doing good work. But also maybe there's an opportunity there to find a way to do that.
I can give a couple pieces of advice on what I do, and then I don't know, Sarah or Katie, if you have anything you want to add. First of all, a little bit speaking to Sarah Cozen's suggestions of LinkedIn, that first paragraph that is under my kind of picture, I use that to describe myself the way I would want to pitch it. You know, we're going to be working on what we call elevator pitches. If you got into the elevator with someone who you really wanted to hire you, and you only had the length of that journey, you know, up 5 floors to say what you do, what would you say? How do you prep that? So we're going to be talking about the elevator pitch a little bit in our next session and in between in emails. I use the LinkedIn paragraph as my way of doing that kind of elevator pitch and describing myself as best I can. I take that then with me in my head when I go to conferences, or even if it's an online event and I'm introducing myself. I do some thinking about, when I'm introducing myself, what do I say that I am? You know, am I a resilience advisor? Am I a market systems advisor? Am I, you know, depending on the audience and kind of what that conference is about, how I fit in. So it's not quite what you mean, but I think every single time you introduce yourself, you have a chance to solidify that group's understanding of who you are and what you do. That would be my takeaway. Sarah or Katie, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to kind of add to that.
I know that CV formats vary widely based on country, donor or client that you're looking at, but in the United States, it's somewhat common to have a section that talks about skills. So if there's a certain kind of methodology that you're familiar with, a software package that you're familiar with, or even just kind of including some of those keywords that indicate sectors or areas of focus, you could have just a couple of lines in your CV to kind of pull in keywords from the TOR or that are relevant in the sector that you're focusing on, and include them there to show that you have those as well.
Right, and that's really what the cover letter or the proposal can do for you as well. I've had some applications that I've done where I literally had a column of like, they've had it. This is back to Katie's point of like, when procurement people are looking at your stuff, it's very different. You can see in the application form, and I will literally, they'll say like, minimum 10 years experience, and I'll write 25 years of experience in blah, 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 you know, and then I'll do the next point, that bullet point that they made, and I'll make a little mini chart or table to make the procurement people happy, right? So, but I'll do that in my cover letter. So there are ways. All right, and somewhere in here, while we're speaking of this topic, we had a question from Deco, which asked about the importance of the picture on the CV or any consulting document. My understanding is that that is not generally required, but you guys are the hiring managers. Tell me, pictures on your CV, what do we think?
For me, it's not required. No.
Not
Cool.
required. I feel like it's very culturally kind of specific, varies by country.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I think it's it depends on who you're applying to, but it may be a very cultural thing. I think in places like the US and Europe, it almost makes you feel a little uncomfortable because you're like, oh, I don't want to be biased in any way. Don't show me what you look like. That will bias me. So I know that when I've been a hiring manager, my reaction was a little taken aback. Like, don't show me the picture. I want to focus on your skills, and that is the reason I'm hiring you. Good. Okay, so I should be Rama, do you want to come in and ask your question about advice when you've got a range of subjects? This is kind of just digging down into what we've been talking about, highlighting things. Rama, do you want to expand on your point?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my issue is just this is kind of also a bit personal, but and also I deal with different subjects. Like I have dealt with security, governance, health, livelihoods, and all of this. I've done consultancies at different levels. And I would honestly say I'm not proficient with all of them. I have a background in health and maybe a bit of livelihood. And sometimes it works for me well. Sometimes it's difficult. I'm not very happy with the result. And so in this situation, would I just move on, like keep trying? Or should I tone down and then focus on specific areas that I really I'm proficient with?
Any thoughts?
I'll jump in.
Great, go ahead.
Because I
Katie.
consider myself a generalist, actually, and I've always sold myself as a generalist, and I see that as a superpower. Don't think that because you haven't got deep expertise in one subject, that devalues you. Actually, a lot of the work that we do are in complex settings, looking at multiple sectors, particularly when we're looking at market systems all at the same time. And actually, what you find is experts with deep knowledge of one topic really struggle to think about systems thinking, which is a lot of what the expertise, what the focus of a lot of the people on this call are doing. So think of it actually as a skill to be able to generalize and look at all of those cross-cutting and integration perspectives. If a tender comes out that is asking for very deep expertise, you'll know because they're going to go into a certain level of jargon and language that you probably won't understand. However, there could be something like there are a number of tenders that go out around capacity building or organizational change to be able to do more things around a certain topic, where actually a mix of a skill set of understanding those cross-cutting issues, as well as potentially some really deep dive knowledge, would be useful. So in that sense, it would potentially be looking at creating a team yourself that you know that you can provide that generalist knowledge and bring the whole story together quite well, but you might need to bring another consultant in to support you. Or it's that you pitch yourself as a generalist saying, I would value some expertise on X, Y, and Z to support this, whether that can be provided internally by the NGO, so that you're saying, I actually need to talk to, say, for example, a lot of your protection specialists to really get an idea of what the challenges are, but then I can bring that to what it means for the whole organization or other sectors that have to work with protection. This is an example. Or you can go externally and find other consultants. I'm trying to put it out there that don't undervalue yourself. I think generalists have this issue of imposter syndrome, particularly in the aid sector, where we often talk about sector specialisms. And I came into this sector, into the humanitarian space, being a generalist. And now I'm the lead on systems approaches within DRC. So it is possible. It's working about where you feel comfortable with developing that niche, and which type of work that is advertised is going to be best suited for your skill set, and how to build on that skill set if you've got the gaps.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, Katie. And it's okay to wear different hats on different days, right? It's okay to, so as Katie has already said, so much of our work is interconnected that it would be almost impossible to have truly one sector that never touches any other type of work, because everything's a little different. Kind of a little bit building on that, we've got two questions that are asking about partnerships or consulting. So Ken has asked, what are the prospects of pairing up with other consultants to cater to different requirements that may not exist all in one person? And Abu Bakr is asking a similar question in terms of if there's a preference for individuals. I'm going to add in there like partnerships or actual firms. Is there any kind of preference by hiring managers? So I'll deal with, I'll throw that out to you guys. I have my own experiences, but maybe Sarah Kozin, you haven't had a chance to speak for a minute.
I would say partnerships can be really useful. I mean, I have experience where I've worked with a team of 2 consultants with kind of complementary expertise. For example, if App Associates is looking at expanding our work in a certain country and we don't have a permanent team there, I might engage 2 consultants, one kind of more senior with a particular technical expertise and one more mid-level who has broad networks and can kind of make connections and kind of help me think through what opportunities look like. So I see value in kind of the complementary scopes of work, the complementary expertise. From a contracting perspective, that's 2 individuals. So a partnership, I think, is still probably engaging 2 individuals. So from a contracting perspective, I would just not want that to slow down the process. In terms of engaging an individual versus a firm, for my organization, both are fine. Both take about the same amount of time. So I don't have a preference, but that is very organization by organization specific. In some organizations, it's a lot easier to move forward with an individual who is registered as a firm or a consulting firm versus an individual. So you might have different experiences there.
Right. Katie, did you have your hand up for this question or a different one? This
Yes,
one, go ahead.
just to build on what Sarah is saying, I think when I see differences between an individual consultant versus a firm applying for a role, there's pros and cons, right? I know that often an individual consultant might have a bit more flexibility to different changes, to adapting to consultancies, particularly if they're iterative. Sarah Murray was mentioning that in the inception phase of her consultancy with CGAP, there was a lot of back and forth to actually iterate on the original work to make it work for everyone. And you often get a bit more flexibility with an individual consultant with that. But with an individual consultant, if they're sick, if they have to go on vacation, if they haven't got all the expertise, they don't have any backup plans to actually support that. So there might be different delivery timelines or potential risks to that. So looking at firms can also offer a different balance. For us, it's seeing what the whole package is and what we need to get delivered and we do a bit like a pros and cons with it. So when we actually get tenders that come in, we have to go through a rigid review process and compare and contrast. And often we interview a few consultants before we actually make a decision about who to go with. So it's I think when you're looking at developing your proposal, it's working out what works best for you to deliver on that tender. Nobody's getting more or less of a preference. It's actually customized to what we need at the time. I wanted to also then build on this point, Carrie, around the practicalities of subcontracting as well, and the operationalization of that. So often we have talked a few times about building consultant teams, particularly if you're working as a single consultant and you might need to work with another consultant to fill a skills or experience gap, or maybe a larger consultancy that doesn't have the field knowledge or relationships gets in touch with you and you are asked to work with them. There are different kind of subcontracting agreements that can be made then. That sometimes is quite complicated a process for a single consultant to manage, because you're now going to not have just a contract with the INGO or other implementing partner like a Sarah Cozen to work with. You also have a contract with the consultants that you are pairing with as well. So you'll have two contracts to manage, and you'll have to go through what the roles and responsibilities and the risk taking and your payment plans are within that relationship too. And you really need to make sure that before you go to the client and say, we're happy to do this, that with that subcontracting agreement, you are very clear with each other about what the expectations of the role are and what your responsibilities are, who is taking on the risk for what deliverables and timeframes, and also what the payment plans are, because that's really, really important as a single consultant. Big firms can sometimes wait for payments to be made many, many months down the line because they might have their consultants as employees, so they're getting a regular salary. Whereas you are probably going to get paid at the end of a contract or through different payment plans through a contract. You need to make sure you can financially survive as you are going through these relationships. So you do make sure that if you are thinking about bringing those teams together, that you think through the practicalities of that and how it works for you as well. Again, going back to, well, do I have the power to even ask about payment plans or advances or something that's different from this big firm saying this, or we've got to do this partnership and the NGO, the DRC has said, oh, we're only going to pay you at the end. There is always room to ask. So ask. Yeah. If you need that, that's important.
I think that's a really important point. You should always ask, particularly when it comes to payment plans. You will often find that people write out the deliverables in a very kind of just like looking at a calendar. They don't think about 4 months is a long time to not get paid. And I have almost always found in my own personal experience that if you go back and say, can we split this deliverable in 2 so that I can have almost monthly payments or whatever, that usually people are very, it's almost always possible if you ask before the contract is signed, before the contract is finalized in any way. Another thing, kind of building on what Katie has said in this question of partnerships versus consulting firms, I personally have found that often there are the method of least resistance is to have a shared TOR with my local consultant friend, but it's 2 separate individual contracts. So it does mean the organization has to do 2 individual contracts, but it speaks to the point that Katie was making, where there's a lot of clarity for everyone around who's responsible for what, which deliverables are handled by which individual. And we're back to that trust question. It can raise that level of trust because you and your partner have gone through and said exactly how many days they're getting paid for, exactly how many days you're getting paid for, who's responsible for what, and all of that before the contracts are set up. And I think there's a lot of flexibility if you engage in the conversation. So we're gonna move on from that a little bit. And I wanted to I wanted to again encourage my speakers to go into the Q&A and answer questions where you see them relevant to you. I know there's one for Sarah Murray there. Katie, I can see that you've been going in there as well. I wanted to pick up on Brahim's question because he gave us an early one, that you'll see Brahim's question in the chat rather than in the Q&A, and he's asking about USAID contracts specific to third-party monitoring and evaluation of emergency and humanitarian programs. I'm going to try and answer this because I think I know it, but I think that Sarah has actually already answered this question. So I will pivot back to the speakers in 1 second. In answer to where are the opportunities advertised, they really are advertised generally through the firms that have been given the contract. So the first evaluation and monitoring organization that came to mind is Tango. I worked with them a lot in East Africa. If I wanted to do that kind of work, I would start looking at Tango's website or maybe Chemetrica's website or the firm's individual websites. And I might look on DevEx because they have quite a good listing of things like that. That's where I would go rather than looking to USAID, because it won't be advertised by USAID. It'll be advertised by whoever got the contract. And even the getting the contract part will still be advertised on an NGO or consulting firm website, because that's when it's the, Sarah Kozin talked about being the bid proposal, the bid development that's done. In that moment, you're looking for local consultants that can contribute to the bid being created. Sarah, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's right. I think the question of how to find opportunities in third-party monitoring, it is to identify the organization that is doing that work currently or planning to do that work in the country that you're looking at. And that varies country to country.
Right. And so the second question that Brahim has there is, what are the criteria for local consulting firms? I think that's going to totally depend on what the actual ask is in that moment, what kind of bid they're developing, what kind of timelines, what kind of information they're looking for. Sarah Murray, I don't know if you wanted to add to that at all, because you were talking about the whole, know what you have to offer, and it feels like that criteria is a piece of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add on the, I don't get involved in the third party monitoring so much, but yeah, I think one of the questions in the chat was around, okay, if you don't have the skills listed in the scope of work, but you have practical hands-on experience, is there a possibility there? And I would say, regardless of the topic that's being sought after, generally as a hiring manager, I want what I write. And as Katie said earlier, that's the best case scenario. That's the ideal world that we hope to be living in, but that's often not available. So I do think those are the types of things where it can be a growth experience for the consultant to stretch a little bit, and to represent, okay, I have this and this and this, but also kind of be very clear about where you might need a little more support from the organization that's doing the hiring. So, yeah.
And I want you to build on that, Sarah, because you had also talked about when they don't know what they want. Sometimes you read an advertisement and it seems like they just want, they want everything. And there's no way that one human would have everything. How do you suggest, what are some of the questions that people could use to kind of not say, you don't sound like you know what you want, but really make them start to clarify? What kind of questions should they ask either in the interview, or I would always do that in the interview, so that's why I say that, but maybe there's a better way.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's a question period, right, for that. And I found that, you know, that's a good period of time to get a sense of if this is a good fit also for you as a consultant, and the opportunity, the types of responses you get there. But I think asking about priorities when there is a laundry list feel to a scope of work, to ask that, okay, of these things, which is the most strategically important deliverable? And try to get a sense of if they already have that in mind, and then that also signals for you, okay, like in your list of expertise and experience, how does that match up with what's needed? And sometimes they don't know, and sometimes then it becomes a process of figuring that out together, and that's a messier way to do it, but that can, you know, if you're in a growth mode, or those can also sometimes be the most interesting opportunities where it becomes a more creative type of work. So it's or if you're up for that style of interaction, that can be a way to do it.
I know I often ask, who has to make decisions with this information, and
Yeah.
what kind of decisions are they making in what kind of time period? Because a decision that you have to make 2 weeks after the report is finished, well, that tells me there's no flex in the timelines, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a document they expect to use for a year, well, the context is going to change a lot in a year. So I'm going to write a different kind of report or a different set of recommendations from those two different situations, right?
Yeah. And that
So,
gets
and
back to the earlier point of, do you starting early, that process of understanding what the client wants and needs. And
Yeah.
I think that question of what is going to be done with your work by whom is, they're really
you would
spot
be
on.
amazed at how many people can't answer the question, how is this going to be used for decision making? What decisions will be made as a result of this piece of work? I am shocked how often people will ask me to do a piece of work and they can't say what they're going to do with the document or the, result. And I'm like, really? Like, really? But what's great is then they think about it, right? And it changes maybe how the document gets written, or how I even approach it, who we include in the process, all of those kinds of things. Great. Deco has a question around when the HR manager, in what situation do you normally need local consultants? Is it just, are you using them kind of all the time, or is there something specific? So that's open for all of you, actually. Katie, do you want to go first?
I think it's program specific, and I'm doing this from DRC works in 42 different countries across 5 different sector specialisms in both emergency response and durable solutions or long-term programming. So to say that it's very, very difficult. Everything we've got thousands of programs running at all different times. I would say that the preference would always be to work with local consultants if we want to get the best data from the field and build good relationships with local actors and really understand the behavior and why people are doing what they're doing. As well as a local consultant that we know that we can go back to. As Carrie said, contexts are constantly changing. So there's a reliability and a consistency with using local consultants as well, and building trusting relationships with them. That's a preference. I'd say it's hard to find local consultants. From my perspective, it's been really hard to find local consultants, and I do not know whether that's because not able to see the tenders, not able to apply to the tenders, not able to get through the filters on the tenders yet. But certainly I would like to see more high quality local consultants, even if that's pairing with other consultants or global consultants as well, working with us. But in general, I wouldn't be able to say anything specific because it's very much program context in terms of what we need. So sorry, it's a little bit of an ambiguous answer.
Sarah Kozin, anything to add?
And no, I don't think so. I agree with Katie's points. Maybe if we take an example, it might be a little bit more helpful, but no, nothing concrete to add right now.
Carrie, I mean, you know, you said a lot of the people on this call working in market systems development or market-based programming, yes. So I would say where a lot of our gaps, normally capacity gaps or potential competency gaps within the organization, tend to be around having consultants that can do really good field analysis, systems analysis at the upfront stage of a program, and then can convert that data, and this is where we see a significant gap, can convert data into insights to actually inform design of programs. We can get very good data and then it be left there, but what we see a significant gap often in is consultants being able to analyze that data to show us what are key insights to inform the design of programs. So that is something we're definitely looking for.
Yeah.
And I'd also say I can think of three things. The second one would be in constantly changing contexts, particularly fragile contexts in which we're working with, mostly those kind of going back and forth from looking into recovery and sustainable development and then back into shocks and stresses and emergency, is having consultants that can actually have their finger on the pulse. They know what's happening and how that's affecting certain market systems so that we know how better to respond, not to undermine those systems, but to work better with them. That would be the second thing. And then the third thing that a consultant often can really support us with is that overarching, how do we work better ourselves to be able to do this type of programming? That's more of an organizational capacity building and strategic. So there's that kind of strategic capacity building, and then there's program technical specific. I would say that tends to be the range of type of tenders that we would put out. So maybe that helps kind of figure out where you'd want to place yourself in terms of offerings.
Great. And sorry, I had something I was going to build on that with, but I totally forgot it. So we'll just move on. Sarah, Murray, anything for you to add to that part of the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes back to this defining your offer theme. And as I mentioned, I talked mainly about like the country experts that we are needing in the financial sector, have the deep connections and relationships and knowledge of the twists and turns of the industry. So that's one very clear category, but then there's also the kind of specific technical expertise. So we have our regulations expert that we call on, and we have our, qualitative research, financial diaries people that we call on. So it's a range of sort of like local expertise, technical, and sometimes those things can get closer and be overlap, but it seems to me like you either get one or the other in most cases.
Right. And it was the thing I forgot and was wanting to come back to is analysis. So I have seen over the course of my years that the analysis piece is actually one of the hardest ones for, well, everyone, all consultants of every nationality. And any thoughts from the group? I mean, on how do you get better at analysis? I know my own approach is I attend a lot of webinars to understand when people are talking about the results of their program, they ultimately are talking about how they did the analysis. We went and we gathered this data, and here's what we did with it. So for me personally, the attending of webinars and looking at how people do their analysis, whether I agree with it or not, I learned something. And then looking at different tools that have come out, because most of the time when a tool comes out, it actually is about the analysis. There are very few tools that we use that are just, here's how you gather data, right? They teach you how to gather it so that you can analyze it in a certain way. So looking at every time there's a new tool that comes out, I try to skim through it to help me understand, okay, so they're organizing the data in this way, and that's essentially analysis. I don't know, since that's such a highly desired skill, what does this group think is another way to, you're also technical experts, so what do you think is a good way to improve your analysis skills?
I've recently been focused more on or going deeper on the storytelling element of analysis, which is, I think, an interesting way
Yeah.
to get
What does that mean? Storytelling. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, it's how do you bring an audience with you using the information that you have, answering the question that you've been given in a way that keeps them engaged and keeps them listening. And there's a lot of communications tools, I think, that end up being quite useful when you're in the middle of analysis process at the beginning, like maybe at the beginning and then the end, and the middle is actually like just data massaging and looking at it. But so at the end, you have a clear message about what you found and that it goes back to what your audience cares about. I think that's when you have someone that really has a passionate story to tell, it sticks, and yeah, it's a really clear skill and kind of rare, and I just highlight that as something to think about for everyone here.
Great. Other thoughts, Sarah or Katie? Katie?
I think that analysis isn't just a skill, it's an art. And I say that from pretty much doing about 10 to 15 years of strategic analysis to inform the design of new products and services in the private sector before I came into the humanitarian sector. And we certainly had a lot more time than our programs did provide us in the humanitarian sector to come up with new ideas to address very complex problems. I think one of the best methods of doing it is mentorship and learning by doing. And I think that if you feel like this is a skill set that you need to develop and that you know that, personally, I would look at actually how you could get employed by other consultancies where you can get that mentorship and support for a few years and really get good and confident in doing that. Because when you go solo, you don't have anybody else to ask when you're trying to analyze all that data and coming up with a lot of the ideas. And I find and your career plan can be going and working for another organization and then being a freelancer again. That's mine. That's how I know that I've always got good value add, and what I know is relatable to the clients that I apply for when I go back to freelancing.
I think
So
that is
that's
a
one.
base for partnership though, too. I think
There is a
if you
basis
are
for
able,
partnership.
you started out by saying, if you know you want to build a certain skill set, you could go to somebody who's established and say, hey, I would love to partner with you because you're doing a thing that I find really interesting. And you would find that out, as I said, by reading people's stuff or going to webinars where they present or whatever.
I think creating those networks and relationships.
If you don't have access to a mentor.
Exactly, and that's the challenge, Carrie, that I'm hoping that through this networking and then these webinars, you'll be able to give people or make those connections and access, so they have the access to those people that have that mentorship or capability. Because I feel for everyone, it is hard if you don't know who to go to, and cold calling or cold emailing people is a bit scary, and often they get ignored. So I think there's one, but there's also other, there's courses, there's quite a lot of courses as well online that really look into this point now, because there is an acknowledged skill gap globally around this. So IDEO and Acumen do courses around moving from analysis to design, or how to interpret, get insights from your data. So you can have a look at things like that. They have free podcasts and webinars that you could be looking at as well, and seeing how you could challenge the way that you work already for free. Or you can look at training courses that you could put under as a business expense and be looking at that, or seeing if there's ways for local consultants to get discounts to be able to be on those courses. There's always things out there to use as well.
Great. Sarah Cousin? Anything
No, I
to
think
add?
I think all of these points are spot on. I think that, you know, when you're looking at analysis and especially kind of more sophisticated kind of statistical analysis, you would look at that as kind of a, I hope that other hiring managers would look at that as a specific area of expertise that not necessarily everyone is going to have. So for me, that's an example where you would acknowledge that sometimes you need to break a scope of work or a TOR into two separate ones and have someone, if your organization doesn't have that expertise in-house, have that separate from kind of a more technical or broader scope of work because it is so specialized.
Right, right. I'm gonna somewhat quickly go through 3 last questions, and then we're just gonna kind of wrap it up. So one of the questions that was in there was, what do you do if your best references are unpublished? I know this happens a lot to me, a lot, because NGOs ask for internal products, right? And there's 2 things that I do, guys, and we'll see what the hiring managers say, whether this would fly with you when you're evaluating the CVs and the like. One is I always still list it under my publications. If somebody asks about it specifically, I can always talk about it. Often I can get permission to share it, as Katie was talking about, an example of my work, as long as there's not something that is sensitive information. It's often, not always, but often possible to share it. The other thing is I try and convince them, maybe through the next consultancy that I do, I try to use it as a source and then convince them to put it online so that all the sources are online. And then this literature review or whatever I did eventually gets out there in the public view, and you can then use it more. So I try to make sure my stuff is being used. It's back to that first question of what kind of decisions are going to be made with this? How is it going to be used? And you push them to do that before you even start the writing. Other thoughts about unpublished work as your reference, guys?
I would suggest that all people look at the chat comment because I answered 3 different bubbles to this with quite a few different things, which probably match yours as well, Carrie. So I'm going to say a lot of my comments are there so that we can answer other questions as well.
All right. There was also a question about how much does being fully employed interfere with being a consultant. I have also done that one. You shouldn't do it without the permission of your employer. I strongly discourage you from being fully employed and not letting your employer know. That said, often I have found that when I asked, they said, as long as it doesn't interfere with your work, that sounds interesting. It sounds like it might contribute to our work. So yeah. It just depends on whether you're actually able to do the work while you're doing your full-time job. Thoughts from hiring managers?
I think you need to make a case to the organization that you're applying to that's looking for a consultant that you would be able to do the work just as well as someone who's not fully employed. For me, I see it less frequently, and our I wouldn't say our procurement side of the house would advise against it, but they would ask a question. So I think it's something that you would need to justify and make a case for when you're submitting your proposal.
Fair enough. Last point is, I think, a really important one, and possibly much more relevant for our local consultants than any of us more international consultants, and that is conflict of interest. I think it's really a valid point that there may be things that that local consultants are asked to do, and I just mean like gathering information from certain groups, that appear to be a conflict of interest. I don't know, Sarah Murray, has this come up in any of the work that you've been doing with all the different, because you've got a nice like group of 10 consultants that you're working with right now. Have you had to deal with conflict of interest issues, and what would you do if you did?
The biggest issue we deal with is like kind of on the borderline here is folks that some of our consultants have contracts with the World Bank, which is in, you know, countries where there's been a coup and there's no diplomatic relationships with the government. They're absolutely not supposed to, as a World Bank employee, kind of engage with government, talk to them as a representative of the World Bank. And we're kind of in a gray zone there as an adjacent entity. And so I feel like this, but we actually sometimes really quite need that perspective of government through a crisis period. So I feel like it actually kind of sometimes puts the consultants in a tricky position to navigate how to do what we want them to do without putting at risk any of their other client work. That's a bit different than like a, you know, a different type of conflict of interest scenario there. But I would just say that your currency is reliability and trust and transparency. And what I appreciate is the consultants that say, I'm not comfortable doing this, and this feels a bit too on the edge. I'm not going to do that. Or, you know, I really need to consult with my World Bank, you know, project X manager before we talk, and that'll determine. And we respect that. And I would in all cases prefer transparency about tensions and conflicts than having a consultant do something that feels, you know, on the edge there. And I think that also applies in situations of security where we are asking for information that, you know, might not be easy or always safe to collect. And my default, of course, our default is do not do anything that puts you in danger. But, you know, that's on me that's on me to create space for that conversation to happen. And I also rely on consultants to flag when I might have not spotted from my cozy office in Europe, you know, when a request might not be, you know, feasible or might put someone at risk. So I think that two-way conversation is important, and I strive, of course, to create that space. And that's something I think I would put as a really high priority as a local consultant, to go after the opportunities where those sorts of concerns are reflected, where transparency is valued and appreciated.
Anything to add, Sarah or Katie?
I really like the fact that Sarah brought up the security point. I have walked away from consultancies and previously where I couldn't get the information for a risk assessment to go and work in fragile and conflict settings, because it was put on me to provide my own insurance and my own security to be able to do that, when I was ultimately working with a large organization that had a lot more support for that. It is okay to walk away if you do not feel safe. But likewise, Sarah has just mentioned, you can facilitate that conversation. Make sure you know and have the confidence to facilitate that conversation early on, particularly if you know you're going to be working in areas that could be dangerous areas to work in.
All right. I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists today. Give them a real or Zoom round of applause. We really, really appreciate you coming in and just talking honestly about what it's like from your perspective, because as any consultant knows, some days you just feel like you're working in a vacuum. You're like in a closet where no one can see you. So we really, really appreciate you being here. Katie, it seems like you had one more thing you wanted to say. Go ahead.
I think it's also a great platform for us to meet local consultants, and I want to put that out there. You know, I just said that it's challenging for us to meet local consultants as well, so kudos to actually doing this. But I wanted to just make sure that consultants are also on certain platforms that I know future tenders are going to be going out on, to make sure that I leave you with that snippet. I can also put it in the chat. But building on what Sarah was saying around LinkedIn, monitor specific INGO procurement websites and you can have notifications put on there that come into your email. So just take an hour one day and go to those big NGOs you know work in your local area and get onto those notifications. Get onto notifications for Relief Web as well. If you are not on the Markets in Crisis D group, Carrie is an advisory committee member on that, so she knows how to connect you to it. And also the Beam Exchange, which is more around market systems development. We always post any tenders that are on this specialism onto those, because I know that those are where the specialisms for consultants will be. So if you're not on there, you've got to get on there. And try and still curate and build those personal networks, or know a consultant that has, and see if you can make those connections. Because that's often, if I know I need to get a consultant in X country and I don't know people, I will say, go to Carrie and say, do you know local consultants I could go out and talk to? And then the final thing will be, on platforms like the Markets in Crisis D group and the Beam Exchange, and even your LinkedIn, you can actually showcase your work or showcase your opinions. Your opinions are as important, your thought leadership, the things that are going on in your mind are as important as the publications or the work that you've been paid to do. If you start putting that out to the world, we see and we listen. Yes. And we respond if we have time as well. And if you're putting proactive or interesting insights out there, you're suddenly on our radar. So yes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, suggest a bit of homework as well, going to the Beam Exchange and going to the Markets in Crisis and just see the posts that people are putting up there. You'll see familiar names that do it, but I can tell you that those familiar names are always being sent new tenders, because we know that they're on the pulse, as we would say. They're constantly thinking about the changes and the things that need to be done in this space. So get involved in that. Don't feel like you can't put out silly questions. Don't feel like you can't put out your thoughts. That is what is valued, particularly locally relevant, up-to-date thoughts, because the people that are sitting, like Sarah said, in our cozy houses in Europe, we don't see all those changes that are happening on a daily basis. You guys do. So put it out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And yes, I already was planning to have all of these links available in our follow-up email, but I'll go ahead and I will just put a couple of them. I've put in Beam Exchange and the Markets in Crisis Community of Practice. I've put those links in the chat for you. They will be in the follow-up info as well. So thank you again to our to our speakers, our panelists. You are very welcome to stay. We're going to continue talking about a topic in a more training kind of way. But you're very, very welcome to stay and give your perspectives as well. I know you're super busy people, and I told you I would let you go at a certain point, so you can also no obligation to stay at all. So with that, I'm going to do a little bit of a transition for us here. We have, let me just quickly bring my screen up to the page that I want. All right. There we go. All right. So show me in the chat. Show me in the chat with your hands up. Do we think this is true? Does that resonate for people, that statement? We've got a couple of raised hands. For me, I think that this statement is really what it is to be a consultant. You know, we are the people who make things happen. And in order to in order to do our work, we have to have people who trust us. So that's why I kind of want to use that quote as a transition for talking a little bit more about trust. So we've heard the importance of trust through these discussions that we've had today so far. I want to present an idea which is called the economics of trust. And this is an idea that's been put forward by somebody called Stephen Covey. You may have at a certain point heard of a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So this is a kind of framework for how to make yourself, your work, more effective. And not just your work, really, like making sure that your family life is getting what you need, what your family needs, and making it fit with the way you live your professional life. So this is from some of the resources that came out after that book. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People has been around for, 25 years. The Speed of Trust is another book by Stephen Covey, and it's much more recent, but it really, really resonated with me and with the things that we've been discussing. So I wanted to bring it up. And essentially what it's saying is that when trust is a multiplier for consultants like us. When trust is high, things go faster and they cost less. So give me a thumbs up if you can see if this resonates with you. When trust is low, the work that we do slows down. We're being checked on all the time. You have to have more meetings to make sure everybody's on the same page. So the speed goes down, and that means more of your time, more of your client's money is being spent managing things. So from my perspective, this issue of how do we increase trust is hugely, hugely important. And like I said, Speed of Trust is a whole book, and I will give you some links to some resources. I'm not going to try to go through all of it. But in introducing this idea of almost like a trust tax when trust is low, and getting us to a point where we can take control of how do we build trust in our relationships. I liked this slide and this information that they have, because I think there are some myths or some beliefs that we have about trust. Some people believe it's like you either have it or you don't. Whereas the Speed of Trust would say you can actually create it. And I think we all know that you can destroy it really, really quickly. There's a great Warren Buffett quote that talks about how trust takes years to build and can be destroyed in 5 minutes. I think you can do it a little bit faster than years, but there's a lot of relevance in that quote. There's an idea some people might believe that you can't, because it's either something you have or you don't, you can't really teach it. Well, that's what we're going to start talking about, is actually it can be taught. You can learn how to build trust. And I think what's important for this group is that then once you have that skill, you can leverage it as one of your strategic advantages. We've been talking about how important networks are, and networks will put out their very trusted consultants first. And that's why we really want to dig into building trusts in every single relationship that we have. Some people think of trust as like a soft skill. It's all woolly, and because we work in resilience and things like that, we're maybe more comfortable than some people with this soft ideas. But actually, trust is able to be measured in very quantifiable ways. More expensive, taking longer. Those are, if you are a person who really likes quantitative data, that's something to look at. And many people believe that trust is something that you establish one person at a time. But I would offer the example that if you have the trust of a gatekeeper or an influential person in an organization, that is how you extend your network. So you may know somebody who works in that organization, and if you are trustworthy from their perspective, they will then recommend you when opportunities come up. So I think we want to focus in this session, or this half session, on how do we, like, practically, what can I do to start building trust with the people that I work with, or the networks that I want to extend. So I just wondered if anybody already has an example of personally how they measure trust in a relationship, or how they manage themselves to show trust in a relationship. I'm going to stop sharing for a second because it's so hard for me to see hands. Anybody already have an example? I've got one I can share, but I want to hear from you guys. All right, I'll go ahead and share my little top tip. But if you do have an example, please go ahead and put it in the chat once you've heard my example, as I go on. So one of the things that I once had a mentor, much like Katie had suggested, and I had one particular regional director who I had to work with, and I had a terrible relationship with this person. We were always talking at cross purposes. And I don't really know why. There wasn't like any good reason for this, but we were just always like this, right? And my mentor said, I want you to think, and I'm asking you to do this now. I want you to think of somebody in your life. It doesn't have to be professional, but somebody who you would say you have a 10 relationship with. You can always rely on that person. You just know that if you call them, they will respond immediately. Of course, I can help you, no problem. They are one of your, you can just always rely on this person. And I want you to just think about, what is it that makes you rely on them or trust them? Okay. And then I want you to think of somebody who is like a 0 or a 1 or a 2. You have this person regularly in your life, and they kind of just always let you down. You can't get the relationship to work. So everybody got those in their head? So the idea, I gave you a scale of like 0 to 10, right? And for me, this regional director, he was about a 3. Like, he would do what he said he was gonna do sometimes if somebody else was asking him to, not me, right? So I knew he had some integrity in there, but I just didn't have a good relationship with him. And my mentor suggested that I think of 3 specific actions that I could take that would move him not from a 3 to a 10, but just a 3 to a 4 or 5 within, and she asked me to pick a certain period. And I said, okay, within 2 months, I'm going to move my relationship from a 3 to a 5 with this person. And I picked 2 months because I knew I had a conference coming up, and I would have the opportunity to be face to face with this guy, and I would be able to somehow do this. And I still wasn't really sure how I was going to do it. But one of the things that I put on my list of a practical thing I could do is I decided that every 2 weeks, I would send him a little update email saying, this is what's going on in your region from my technical perspective, and no need for actions from you. I just wanted you to know how things were going, right? He didn't ask for it. I just offered it and asked nothing. And I did it as a way of establishing communication lines, really. He didn't seem to need it. I didn't want to do it. It was extra work for me. I didn't mind, but it was just extra work. But so I did that. And then when I saw him in the conference, we were going out to dinner at the end of a long conference day, and I got on the bus that was taking us to the restaurant. And normally I would have, sat with somebody to chat with all the way along. And I saw him sitting at the back of the bus, and there was an empty space next to him. And I really was tired, and I really wanted to just sit like with a friend at the front of the bus. But I walked all the way to the back, and I sat down next to the guy, and I said, "Hey, how was your day? What did you think of that second session?" And I just chatted. Not because I wanted to, not really. I wanted to build the relationship, but that's why I did it, right? He wasn't a friend yet, but I was extending myself to try and build again that relationship. And over time, so my measurement that I used was that scale of 0 to 10 with people at each end that I used as my mental anchors for what I meant in that scale. And I found those practical steps. And over time, over about 2-3 months, I'd say we got to a 6, 7. And, in time, he was never going to be my best friend, but our work relationship changed dramatically. I started getting information that I needed to do my job, and it made my work much, much easier. So that's just a little example of how thinking practically about how to measure trust in your relationships, I think in the context that we're talking about, there we go. In the context that we're talking about, you can a little bit do some of this at the beginning of a contract, where you, in that moment where you're saying, okay, I told you my question is, who's going to use the deliverable? What decisions are they making with this data that I'm gathering? Those kinds of questions. Then I might sit down and go, okay, in order to build trust with those decision makers or with my manager of this contract or whatever, here are things I'm going to make sure I do. And then you put it in your calendar or whatever time management thing that you have to make sure that you follow specific tasks. Any thoughts or questions about my story or that idea of the economics of trust? Go ahead, Rachel. Jump in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carrie, for sharing that story. And of course, it reminds me about really dealing with difficult people. Sometimes those people actually report to you, and sometimes you're reporting to them. And really, you just have to, like you just say that you do it mentally and leave the emotions out, because sometimes it's usually the emotions. You just look at the person and you're like, man, this person, they just seem to rub you the wrong way. And really removing those emotions is really, really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing on that one. And of course, the unsolicited offers and to communicate and really go out of your way. That's really a nice one. I was making the notes and just smiling to myself. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Rachel. Kara, go ahead.
Thank you again. I want to highlight the point that you mentioned about the trust building is a process, and how you build the trust with others. It's like a mental, emotional, it's like different dimensions of process that you need to work on it. So I think it's more about the credibility. So it's more about the actions that someone will do and how you go through this process to show that your actions are like you are like as you like walk the talk. It's like not only to talk to the others, and it's more about like to show actions that really and this really required like trust. I think it's not only one side relation. It should be like trust yourself, trust the other, so the trust building will go or continue. If you cannot like trust yourself and your abilities and capabilities to do something, I think you cannot trust others. And the last note, I think, like when you were talking about like your example, I felt that trust is not one dimension in a way that if I trust someone, I may trust like the technicality of a person, maybe I like or skills of a person, but I will not trust, for example. So it's not like one like package. So it can be like or distrust. If you think in distrust, if I say I cannot really like lay on some person that because I know that some technical skills not available for that person, it doesn't mean that I don't trust the person totally. So all of these dimensions, if we think about them, we can really build trust and show credibility and build trust with any counterpart. Thank you.
Karam, it's almost like I asked you to say that because that fits perfectly with what we're about to talk about next. And it's this idea that there are different components that build trust. So this idea of the speed of trust, what that book talks about is that trust is made up of character and competence. And that's a little bit what you were getting at as well. And that then character itself has two elements: your integrity, which integrity means, for me, I heard this definition once, and it just really was perfect from my perspective, that integrity is doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And it sounds very simple, but it can be very, very hard to do, right? So if I said to my kids, I will pick you up at 3 o'clock, and then there's bad traffic, I didn't do what I said I was going to do when I said I was going to do it. I was late, and stuff happens, but it's about keeping an integrity is about then, you call up, and I used an example of my kids, but the reality is we've all had deadlines that were approaching and that were nearly impossible. So you communicate and you say, hey, look, I'm not sure this report can be done by Friday. Here are some options that we have. I can get you this by Friday, or you can give me until Tuesday of next week, and then I can give you what we originally agreed. The renegotiating is a part of that integrity, is a part of doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And I think often, so character has these two elements, integrity and intent. And I think one of the hardest things about the work that we do is that because it is across cultures, and you can define culture however you want here. You can mean American and Kenyan culture, or you can mean living in Kenya, but Somali Kenyans versus, Kikuyu Kenyans. They have different cultures as well. But when you're working across cultures, the intent is really easy to misunderstand. It can be very hard to understand the motivation. And this is why that communication becomes so important. Because if I do reach out to my hiring manager and say, hey, look, I'm not going to be able to do this by Friday. If they believe my intent is that I just want to have an easy weekend, they're going to have a different response than if I have really articulated, this is a challenge I faced. Here is how I'm managing that challenge. And therefore, Friday is no longer doable, right? The intent really becomes part of the trust building. So we have that character and the competence. And then, Karam, what you were talking about was also the capability. And we talked about this a bunch in the with the presenters, the speakers as well, is that it's okay that we have a wide variety of capabilities. What matters is that we are transparent about those capabilities and frankly, the results that we produce, right? It is wonderful to have it, you know, I'm not quite sure how you'd have integrity without having results, because if you said you were going to do it, you either did it or you didn't. You either have the results or you don't. One of the biggest things we heard when we were kind of prepping for these sessions was about the quality of work that local consultants turn in. And it's so hard, isn't it? Because there are different cultural expectations and there are different capability issues. And I think what we all want, and this is hiring managers all the way through to all of us consultants, is we want, and I hope we can do this through these sessions, to build the communication lines so that the expectations are managed and that we don't hear this anymore of quality issues, that they're managed all the way along so that the quality is always what was expected. I think that's really, really possible, but I think it lies in these issues of communication and trust. And Karam, you've got your hands up. I hope others will jump in after you too.
Actually, when you link about like the integrity to results, you said how you will have integrity if you don't have results. One thing came to my mind, that some consultants focus on the results more than the process, and this damages the integrity when focus on the results and sometimes do some action that really not showing integrity. So I think it's very important to focus on that the goals that do not justify the means. So, and here the integrity and the trust can be built in even if we cannot achieve the results. What's important to highlight that we are going through process and doing the actions and using our good intention to do that, even if we cannot achieve the results as perfect as the clients wish, but we are trying our best. So this is, I think, the relation between integrity and results are not all the time that you have to be result oriented in a way that you can just jump over your ethics in the consultancy and through the process. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great. Yes, yes, Karam, I agree. There are a lot of these. There are a lot of different elements. Do other folks have thoughts about this? There was one comment in the chat that I wanted to. Deco was saying that was saying something very similar to Karam of there's one of the important things is trusting yourself from the beginning. And certainly the speed of trusts tools talk about that, the self-trust. They also talk about the importance of extending trust, that in order to have people trust you, you have to trust them. And it talks about how that can feel really risky, but I think it's really important that we think about how, in what way can I extend trust to people who are who I am trying to get the trust from. I'll send you some of the resources, but for a moment I want to stop and ask, there was one other point I was going to make. I want to see if anybody else wants to wants to speak. How does this sound from your perspective? And I'm realizing that we have 1 minute left. I want to hear what you have to say about trust. In order to go ahead, Ken, and you'll be our last commentator today. Go ahead, Ken.
Great, thanks, Carrie. This has been quite an eye opener for me. I'm looking more from the point of view, in order to build good, I can say, trust within yourself and amongst your team, I think it's important to also be self-aware. And I think some of us would get caught up with the work, and there's a lot that we keep on doing, but we hadn't take time to reflect and be self-aware of all our levels of integrity and also how we relate with other people. I think it's important to always have mechanisms where you take a pause, reflect on how you have interacted with people, reflect on how you have delivered your work, look at some of the challenges that you've come across within the course of your work, and just have an idea around. And I think it's within the part where you're talking about emotional intelligence, being able to understand how you come across people, especially managing people, is not an easy. It's in itself is an art, or I can say a science in itself. The moment you are working with different people who are coming from different cultures and backgrounds, and who have different understandings on what your quality standards are, I think it's important to understand and have those reflection moments, and then also have somebody who can be able to download. That's why the point you talked about having a mentor is very important, because these conversations are touching on very soft skills that require some qualitative reflections. And I think it's having a mentor that is able to help you process some of these things, because sometimes these lines are a bit blurred. You can't quite, or perhaps you have you're self-deluded in terms of your work output and how you go about it. But I think it takes a great person to be given feedback in a very, very blunt way. And I think for me, that's what has helped me in my career, is to have people who are able to talk to me and tell me, and even sometimes backstop me on a couple of things, not only on the technical elements, but also on my personality and how I come across in managing people and expectations. So I think when you're having a conversation about trust, it has to be done within the context of self-awareness. And it's also a part of the emotional intelligence, that skill that one has to build over time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Ken. And it's something that I hope we, in other sessions or on the WhatsApp group chat, that we can talk about how to do that when we're building partnerships or when we're starting up a new contract, because I think that's really an important piece of this. I am sorry that I'm not sorry that you had plenty of opportunity to talk to the panelists and get your questions answered. What I had hoped there would be time for, but there is not, is talking about admin tools and kind of how to organize ourselves so that that can be a piece of that operational end, can be a piece of doing what we say we're going to do when we say we're going to do it. I will send these in a follow-up email for everyone. You can see the slide there, what I was planning to talk about. And I'll try to build it into the next session, as well as there's some topics that we can more easily cover on email. And this feeds into what you were just talking about, that self-reflection, Ken. I'm gonna also, in addition to a wrap-up email, I'm gonna be sending out some homework for you. One of the pieces of homework is a self-assessment quiz that really gets at these trust issues. I think it's really interesting. So I will send it out, and I ask you to let me know when you've completed it. You don't need to send me the quiz. I don't need to know your scores, but I will tell you what your scores mean when you tell me that you've completed it. Okay? You will see in the chat that Anna has just put a reflection survey on, what did you learn today? How did it go today? We want to keep learning and keep making sure that these sessions are relevant for you. And that's really what the reflection survey is. So we ask that you do that either now or in the next week. And then the third piece of homework that I have for you is to start coming up with that elevator pitch, 2 to 3 sentences that you will use to describe your work. The reason that's important is because we are putting together these networking sessions The next networking session, or the first networking session, will be with other consultants who may want to partner with you. And when you meet them in Zoom, you want to be able to say, you know, my name is Carrie. I do market systems and resilience work. And I would say that the next opportunity that I'm looking for is da 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 da. So 2 to 3 sentences that describe who you are as a consultant and what you're looking for in your work or in your next assignment, however you want to frame that. That's what we want your pitch to have. And we'll also talk about that in the next session, because again, end of February, beginning of March will be the first of the networking sessions. I am sure that the people that we had today, our speakers, will be wanting, you know, access to your information as well. So if you want to share that, I'll make sure that there's a consistent way to share that. I will put all this homework in the wrap-up email, and along with the link to the reflection survey and the self-assessment quiz for you, all the instructions that you need, along with the link to today's session. I'll put that in the wrap-up email. Thank you so much. 2 hours is quite a long time to sit. I really appreciate the investment that you guys are making in yourselves. We want to have you. We want to have you do this because we want to have a big group of local consultants that we can reach out to. Really looking forward to continuing the conversation both here in these sessions and also in the WhatsApp. And just one last reminder that if you aren't already in the WhatsApp group, but you would like to be, just send me an email and we will make it happen. All right. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to reading your comments about today. And sorry we ran a few minutes over.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for a wonderful session.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you so much.